Going to the phone lines now, we're going to be speaking with the leader of the opposition, People's National Party, and Member of Parliament for South St. Andrews South, Mark Golding. Mr. Golding, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on the Africa Forum this morning.
Good morning, Kabu, and thank you very much for inviting me. It is indeed an honor to be with you for the first time.
All right. You're welcome to the space. And as I said before, you're also welcome to the studio. We talk to you for a minute and we open the phone lines and get the listeners to call in with their questions. So that is an open invitation to you. But this morning, though, we're going to speak specifically about the motion that you tabled in the House of Representation on July 6th, where you called for October 26th, that is, where you called for October 24 to be named and celebrated as a day of commemoration for Baba Paul Bogle and all those who lost their lives in the Morant Bay War of 1865. First, why?
Well, I feel that Paul Bogle has not been sufficiently recognized for the role he played in the liberation of the Jamaican people. I think that he was one of our great heroes, and I think more should be done. The Paul Bogle Foundation, I want to big up the Paul Bogle Foundation, they reached out to me to see whether I would be willing to carry a motion to Parliament, and they had been pushing for this for some time, and in fact resolutions have been passed over nearly 2 decades ago, or a long time ago, in various parish councils calling for something to be done of this nature. And I was persuaded that it was an appropriate step for us to take. This is our 60th year and of independence, or political independence, because, you know, independence is a big thing. And what some would say with justification that we haven't really achieved full independence yet. But nevertheless, 60 years of political independence. And, you know, I read some of the history available on the great man Paul Bogle, and I felt comfortable in pushing for this to happen. I hope that it will be a bipartisan effort. I hope that the government will see its way to supporting it. I don't know. You know, these things tend to get politicized, unfortunately. But, you know, from my perspective, you know, I believe that Paul Bogle deserves to be raised up, you know, higher in terms of his recognition and the honor and accolades for him. My understanding is that, you know, we have the fire baptism on the 24th of October, which is the anniversary of his martyrdom. And that is an international thing growing. And I think this year is going to be bigger than ever in Africa. I believe, you know, a lot of mobilization is being done for people to support it, to light a candle, or, you know, otherwise, you know, engage in celebratory activities to support not only Paul Bogle's memory, which is a central part of it, but also, you know, just to commemorate all of the people who lost their lives under the brutality of slavery. So I feel that it is something worth supporting, Kabo.
And so tell us about the process of this now, for those who don't understand how this works. So you tabled a motion. What's the process?
That's a good question. Okay, so any member of Parliament can table a motion, which is essentially, you know, something that sets out the context and then calls for something to be done. In this case, the motion I table sets out the context of what the summary of Bogle's achievements and his martyrdom, and calls for October the 24th to be designated a day of commemoration, and for, you know, people all over the world to light a candle on that day, and so on. Now, the process is that it is really up to the leader of government business in the House, who is Ed Bartlett, Honorable Ed Bartlett, Minister Ed Bartlett, to schedule. He's the one who controls the agenda of Parliament, and Parliament of the House of Representatives. And that agenda, Parliament is a very procedurally driven place. So the agenda is what determines what can be said on any given day. It's not a place where anybody can just stand up and say anything. That's not how it works. So it is really going to be up to him to determine when this would be actually debated. If it is put on the agenda to be debated on a given day when Parliament is meeting, then I would open the debate as a person who tabled the motion. I would speak to it, and then anyone else in Parliament, in the House of Representatives on the day who wishes to contribute can stand up and speak. And at the end of the day, when everybody wants to speak has spoken, then the motion is put to a vote. And, sometimes people want to propose amendments to it and that kind of thing. And then those, if there are any amendments proposed, those are voted on. And then ultimately the motion itself is voted on and hopefully would be passed. At that stage now, the process has ended in Parliament. It would then be up to the government to take that to Cabinet and say Parliament has passed this motion calling for these things to be done, and then the Cabinet would have to decide whether they want to proceed with it or not. But Parliament having endorsed it in that way, it would be unusual for Cabinet, I think, to not proceed with it. So that is really the process.
And there is this whole thing about gazetting. How does that work? Whether or not something is gazetted?
Yes, well, that is gazetting is there's a publication that the government printer, this is Jamaica Printing Services. When it comes to laws, there's a requirement that the laws either be notified in the Gazette, which means that there are little small sentences put in the Gazette saying that such and such an act was passed on such and such a date, or in the case of some what we call subsidiary legislation now, which is laws made usually by a minister pursuant to an act of Parliament giving him the authorization or her the authorization to make those regulations. Those would then be published in full in the Gazette, and that is a formal step which makes them enforceable in law. And so, if a day of commemoration was to be declared by the government, then that would be gazetted. In other words, there would be a notice of that posted in the Gazette, and that would formalize it. And then from then forward, it would happen every year. Meaning the day of commemoration would occur every year, and it will. The fire baptism is going ahead anyway, but this would give it some official status and make it part of the Jamaican governance system and show that we are moving forward in a progressive way in reconciling with our past and honoring our heroes. And so I hope we can take it to that level. We do.
Yes, I wanted to talk just 1 minute on gazetting, because if all of this happens and it's not gazetted, what does that mean?
I wouldn't get too hung up on the gazetting.
No. Well, you see, I'm going to something else. I'm going to something else. Let me tell you where I'm going.
Yes.
Because my understanding, and you can double check on this. So the records of Baba Sam Sharp, Chief Tachi, and them were expunged. 2016. When was it? A few years ago.
Yes, by an act of Parliament.
Right. Should those be gazetted?
Well, the act should be gazetted,
right.
meaning that there should have been notice in the Gazette that particular act was passed, and the Governor General gave his assent to it. Because the process with legislation, Kabu, is that when it passes through Parliament and it's approved by the House of Representatives, and it goes to the Senate and it's approved by the Senate, or vice versa, because legislation can enter Parliament through the Senate and pass there and go down to the House to be voted on. But most legislation starts in the House of Representatives, goes to the Senate. When it's all done there, then the Attorney General has to sign off that it's compliant with the Constitution, and then it goes to the Governor General for his assent, which is simply he signs it. And then at that stage now, the process of enactment is complete, but there's supposed to be a notice given to the public in the Gazette, essentially, which is that publication.
So can you say, and I know you come to talk about Paul Bogle, but still, this is a motion, and Paul Bogle's was expunged, his records.
Yes.
Do you know if that took place, if we had the gazetting?
I cannot tell you definitively yes or no, because to be really honest, finding out whether something has been gazetted is not the easiest thing in the world to do.
Well, that's what we are finding here as media, because I've been trying to find that out. But my investigations have revealed that has not happened. No, I can't say for sure. So I'm saying, since I have you on the line, I'm saying to you, can you check on that for us?
I'll certainly check on it, because
and let us know.
I know the gentleman who's in charge of Jamaica Printing Services, because when I was Minister of Justice, I had to deal with them quite a lot. Right. So I know him still, and I can ask him about that, and I certainly will do. You see, it's not the process is not one where the gazetting is brought to your attention in any way or anything. And it's not like people buy the Gazette and really read it. It's not that kind of thing. It's just it is published by them, and some law firms, for example, purchase the Gazette and they get delivered to them in big bulk, and they sort it through and put it in their law library and what have you, because it has some legal significance. But it is not something that is brought to their attention in practice. It's not brought to the attention of the public or indeed parliamentarians.
Right. So my understanding that has not happened, and I'm throwing it at you, leader, to see if you can just check on that. I'm going to take a quick break.
Now that you have raised it as a matter of concern, I certainly will. Can
you hold the line for me while I take a quick break?
Sure.
In this segment of the program, we're speaking with a leader of the opposition, Mark Golding, about a motion tabled in Parliament for October 24 to be named and celebrated as a day of commemoration for Paul Bogle and all those who lost their lives in the Morant Bay War of 1865. I heard you saying that it's not just the Morant Bay War, but that it's broader than that. Am I right?
Yes, yes. The motion actually speaks to the fire baptism and the celebration on the 24th of October with the lighting of candles all over the world at 6 p.m. local time, wherever you are, 6 p.m. local time on that day, light a candle to honor the memory of those who were sacrificed and martyred in the Morant Bay War and all persons who died under slavery anywhere in the world.
There is also something about a church service on that day?
Yes, it calls for national commemoration service on that day as well.
What does that mean?
That means that on that day, around Jamaica, churches would recognize the event, the historical significance of what occurred on that date in 1865, and there would be, I suppose, one service which would be designated the national service, which might, at which political leaders might attend and that kind of thing.
So is this an attempt to soften the motion and to quell the revolutionary spirit of the people by including a church service in this motion?
No, it isn't an attempt to do that. I mean, I think that it's an attempt to say that, this is a solemn event and it's on a Sunday. Many people worship on a Sunday. So it's a way that it would bring into that process the recognition of what took place.
But October 24 is not on a Sunday every year.
Not every year, and the motion says if it's not on if it doesn't lie on a Sunday, then the church service would occur on the Sunday nearest to that date.
Why is it so important to include a church service? And this is a point I'm trying to get to.
Well, to be honest, in the original resolutions that were passed by all of the parish councils, this was what was called for at the time. So I didn't want to depart from that.
Why not?
That had already been initiated.
Why not?
So I incorporated it into the motion that I put.
Why not? Why didn't you want to depart from it?
Well, I thought that it was, first of all, the momentum towards doing this didn't begin with me. It was initiated some time before, and a process was pursued at that time, which got widespread support by numerous parish councils and also by the Baptist Church and various other organizations which are mentioned in the motion that I tabled. So out of respect for that fact that the process had started before me and had reached a certain point, I didn't want to abandon that. I wanted to build on it.
Right, but because for us as Pan-Africans looking on, we think the motion is brilliant for calling for October 24 to be named and celebrated a commemoration for Baba Paul Bogle. But then, my antennas went up when I saw the church service part of it, because my thinking is that, yes, Paul Bogle was a deacon, and we hear a lot about that, but Paul Bogle did not march to church. Paul Bogle and them from Stony Gut, they marched on the courthouse, they marched in the square, they marched on the system of oppression, which in our time include the church. So
yes, though, I mean, I think there were some elements of the church that were fighting against the system, weren't they, and that were more revolutionary in their approach at the time. I mean, in fact, as you say, Paul Bogle himself was a deacon. I believe Sam Sharp was also a man of religion. We can't ignore Sam Sharp as well as another very important historical figure.
Sam Sharp also did not call it, right, and it's good to make those points. And so the point I'm making is that Paul Bogle could have called a prayer breakfast. Him could have called a prayer meeting. He could have called something in the church, but they went with their sticks and their stones and their machetes and so on, and marched against the system. And to me, that if we're going to commemorate and celebrate October 24th, the day when he was brutally massacred, him and the others, that I think that we're doing a disservice to this whole motion by including the church. And I know that there's a process, and this is why I asked about it before. Is it too late to take that out?
It is not too late to take it out, because as I said, when it's debated, anybody can move an amendment if they're so minded, you know. Though I'm not sure I fully agree with the point you're making, because I think that, first of all, the motion calls for both things, the fire baptism and the lighting of candles, but also a national commemoration service to honor his memory. And, you know, the fact is that, yes, this event happened. It was a situation of, you know, brutality took place. And I don't see why people who are religious and who will be in church or are inclined to go to church to worship, why? Because this would even include Rastafari, you know, some elements of Rastafari.
Well, I can't speak for Rastafari. I'm not a Rastafarian. I can't speak for Rastafarian, and neither am I a Christian. I can't speak for them. I'm Pan-African. Okay. So the point I am making, though, is to say that Paul Bogle protest and the war was against oppression of the poor, extreme poverty, as you yourself have been pointing out, classism and colorism, police brutality, injustice, lack of access to housing, poor living conditions, you name it. And so he marched against a system. Why not a reenactment of the march? Why calling for people to go down, to sit down in church, to quell their revolutionary spirit? It's just a point I'm making, and I hear you're saying you're not agreeing with it, but it's something to consider, isn't it?
No, it is something to consider, and I certainly think a reenactment would be a good thing, and I think that has happened before, because I actually was present at a reenactment that Bert Samuels, the noted attorney at law, had organized.
But that was led by Irie FM and Professor Vereen Shepherd. So,
I'm aware of Bert Samuels.
Yeah, so I know you were there. I saw you in court. That was an Irie FM initiative, along with Professor Vereen Shepherd.
I'm glad for Irie having done that. Why I mentioned Bert was because he was
because of the play.
When I was for permission to use the courthouse.
I was sitting right behind you in the courthouse, by the way, so I know I know you were there, right? But so we had that reenactment and brilliant writing by Bert and so on. But it was a process, and this is what I'm talking about. That kind of situation, as opposed to, you know, I think it's deliberate whenever we bring the church in. But let me not belabor the point. So you're calling for honoring, commemorating Paul Bogle within the context, though, of the issues that Paul Bogle fought against. How different do you think the times are now, as opposed to those conditions that existed in 1865? Lack of housing, the government at the time telling people to work harder, the oppression of the poor, lack of access to beach, lack of access to proper health care. How different do you think are the conditions then to now?
Well, not different enough, I'm afraid. I think there's still significant areas of life in Jamaica which are very difficult for the ordinary person who's not a wealthy person to cope with. I mean, and injustice still exists, and you know, hardship still exists. I mean, although I think it would be an imbalanced way to project it to say nothing has changed, because I think a lot has changed. You know, access to education has improved. We do have a public health system, albeit underfunded and inadequate, and so on. And we're no longer ruled by a British governor, who in that case was a particularly heartless one.
Well, that's not quite true. You still have the British as a head of state. You still have the British as a head of state.
Yes, we do, and we're fighting to get that changed as well. But it is different to being ruled by
who's fighting? Who's fighting?
He was based here.
Who's
and
fighting?
Was taking day-to-day decisions about how the place was managed. I mean, when Bogle walked from Stonygut with, I think, 6 of them, walked from Stonygut to Spanish Town to meet with the governor, you know, he was trying to get redress for the situation of life that they were living in. He especially the oppressive justice system in St. Thomas.
Yes.
And, they refused to give him audience. I mean, today, if you were trying to do something like that, it would be the Parliament or Jamaica House where you would be going to try and get people to act.
So how does
power in Jamaica.
How does the farm workers in Canada have written to Mr. Samuda saying that they're being treated like slaves? He says that they should work harder. That's basically what he's saying to them. A lot of people have been doing this for years. What's your thinking on that, and why is the opposition so silent on it?
I think that's a disgrace, actually. That I believe Dr. Angela Brownberg, who is our spokesperson for Labour and Social Security, spoke about it last night at our constituency conference, and I expect her to be making more of an issue. I mean, the fact of the matter, and I'm in touch personally with at least one of the farm workers who's a brethren of mine from my constituency, who's somebody who I respect the max. And he's on the farm work program. He's been there for a couple of years now, and he's telling me what is going on. And, when I sent him the article in the Gleaner about what Samuda had said, and he just says a lie, I tell, because what happened is, when he visited there, it was all prearranged and so on. And, of course, they put their best face forward and showed him what they wanted him to see. And he bought it hook, line, and sinker and said, everything is hunky-dory and, there's no basis for complaint. Basically, work hard and, give thanks for the benefit that you're getting. But the reality of the situation is, and it's documented and it's publicized and there's advocacy around it, is that there are problems. The conditions of the workers are not satisfactory in many instances. And there needs to be a solution. We don't want the program to end. The program is extremely important for Jamaica and for many Jamaicans. But that's not to say that because something is basically a benefit that we must just ignore any problems attendant on it. No, we must deal with those things because there's absolutely no reason why the rights of those workers should not be respected.
Over time, the opposition, the PNP, which is in opposition now, have been complicit in all of these things, right? This has been going on for a while. Also, I mentioned just now lack of access to housing and beach and so on. The voice of the people, I think, is so loud and overpowering regarding this. We hear the Prime Minister, for example, making some serious commentary, a lack of empathy and ridiculous commentary regarding housing and access to housing here in Jamaica. The opposition seem to be asleep on it. I'm not quite sure what is happening, but it seems to me as if there is an impotency on the part of the PNP, the opposition, regarding so many of these issues that are facing the people in Jamaica. Your own thinking on that?
Well, I would tell you that, we speak out on many issues on a daily basis, but the media is not always inclined to give us much attention. The media is owned by capital, and the media decides what they want to publish and what they don't want to publish. Press releases are issued on a daily basis. We sometimes call press conferences. What we haven't done is taken to the streets, and that is because I think the timing for that has to be judiciously assessed, and we have to feel that the mood is right and that the people will support it. But apart from that, we have been active. But I agree with you that it doesn't always appear to be so. Because, as I said, a lot of what we say and try and do is not given sufficient coverage because, the media have their own agenda and it's not always consistent with what we are trying to achieve.
I don't think you can blame the media, though, because you have social media now. I was just talking to Professor Lumumba about the way social media changing the global narrative regarding Ethiopia just a few months ago. There was an onslaught from the multinational corporations, the media, big media, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera and them, that narrative that they started to spin against Ethiopia, and social media and change that narrative. So we've got so much out there that we can do. Do you think that, or to what extent is the rift within the PNP itself feeding into this perception of impotence on the part of the PNP?
First of all, we are active on social media. I would say that we joined that party a bit late because it was, I think, initially not recognized as the force that it was emerging to be. So it's only in the last few years that we have really been very active. But we are extremely active. We would obviously like more people to follow us and like us and so on social media. But we post every day quite a lot of content. In terms of the question, your other question was in relation to what was your question? Sorry.
I'm talking about the rift in the PNP and how is that feeding? How is that feeding into this perception?
I'm not sure I would agree with you with the characterization of there being a rift. There was from time to time since 2016 we've had leadership contests, and each of those have been hard fought and have resulted in some amount of hurt feelings and that kind of thing. But we've gone through a process of healing over the last year and a half, which I think has yielded significant success. And, I believe we're now beating to one drum and working together quite well. So I think that
Mr. Golding, I am not political. I'm like Peter Tosh. I bear the consequences, but I don't belong to no party. The question I'm asking is because as a journalist, I stand in a space where this is very, very clear to me. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I say here on this program almost every Sunday is that there is absolutely no opposition, that the JLP will win the next 5 or 8 or 10 elections if the PNP continues on the same trajectory. Aren't you aware of that? Not that I am saying it, but this is how the PNP is being viewed.
No, I'm not aware of that, Kabu. I'm not aware that is an accurate assessment of the situation. I would say we're coming from pretty far behind. The last election we suffered a serious loss, and we have to build back from that. But I believe the table is turning, and I believe we're making progress. And I believe you will eventually recognize it yourself because it will become apparent to you.
All right, well, we'll stand by for that. One of the events, and this is a listener writing in to say, one of the events that triggered the Morant Bay Rebellion, and we'll say the Morant Bay War, is the charging of a black man for trespassing on a long-abandoned sugar plantation. This brings into focus, he says, land rights, which is still an issue that is affecting Jamaicans. Take, for example, the current issue of Long Bay and the displacement of Jamaicans. Little Bay and the displacement of Jamaicans from lands and access to beaches. Can you comment on land rights and beach access?
Yes, these are fundamental issues which, as you have said, are anchored in the historical injustices of the society in which we live. It is a difficult matter because, there's a feeling that well, I shouldn't say there's a feeling. The reality is that it's difficult for many people who have been living on property for a long period of time where the owners have essentially neglected their property rights. It is not easy for the people who have been in possession of that land and may have invested in that land to acquire ownership and solid tenure for themselves. And that is manifest, for example, in the situation in Little Bay, which is a large property where literally thousands of people have been living, but have been living on land that is nominally owned by another entity, and that entity has been trying to evict them. Now, they have been there for a prolonged period of time, and under the law, as I understand it, they should have acquired the right to have title issued to them. But sometimes vindicating those rights is difficult because the procedures in court do not always work to achieve real justice, for one reason or another. And people's resources are limited, and to fight these matters, it takes resources. So, the system is not set up in a way, I think, to assist people to achieve their rights to the fullness. Mm-hmm. And I think that is part. It's not that those rights don't exist, but it's that the achievement and the protection of those rights is made difficult because there aren't sufficient processes in place to support people who need that help. We have a legal aid system in Jamaica, but it is really focused on criminal cases and people who need representation when they're charged by the police. Mm-hmm. But quite often these are not criminal matters. These are what we call civil matters that go to people's rights and the people's issues affecting their daily life for which they need redress from the court. And there's no system of legal aid in place in Jamaica to support that. And that, I think, is part of the problem.
So what? So we identify the problem. What's the solution?
The solution would be to expand the legal aid system to include civil cases and to put more resources behind that. That would be one part. And
in the meantime, what happened to the people? And in the meantime, what happened to the people?
In the meantime, what happened to the people? The people, are facing the situation that needs to be remedied. And this is, you've asked me what I think should be done about it, and I'm saying this is one area, this is one possible solution which ought to be pursued.
You see the problem we have, Mr. Golding, is that we talk about legislation, we talk about changing policies, we've been talking about this for years. I've been doing this program for 31 years. I know what I'm saying. We talk and we talk and we talk and we talk, but we're still talking about the same thing, and we turn around and we call them squatters. But when does it become urgent? When is it an urgent matter? When is it a critical matter for either party to stand up for the people? And I'm talking about that now. And access to the beaches, as a caller, as a listener wrote in, because now, as we talk, Marley Beach in St. Thomas, we have a problem there. We're losing the coastline in rapid. From Negril Point to Moran Point, you can hardly find a public beach anymore. And the government is talking through two sides of his mouth, as the PNP did before, about developing beaches and so on. But at the same time, we're losing access. And both parties are sitting on your laurels while the people lose access. Mr. Golding.
Yes, well, decisions were taken quite a long time ago, which have had, I think, fateful consequences, which is essentially that persons were allowed to own private property up to the shoreline, up to the high water mark in Jamaica. Anyone has a right to go onto a beach between the up to the high water mark. That is the basic law of the land, and that is public land. But above the high water mark, land can be owned privately. And that has resulted in, as Jamaica has stressed and tried to promote itself more and more as a tourism destination, that has resulted in a type of tourism which has been more enclave tourism and which has excluded the public from access to many of our beaches. It is an unfortunate situation because it didn't have to go that way. For example, in Barbados, it has not gone that way. And the public has much more generous and proper rights to beaches in Barbados than they do here. In terms of how we solve that matter of Kabul, I think the first step would be to ensure that those beaches that still exist and that are not owned, or which are not subject to private owners preventing access, those need to be protected for the public. And and that needs to be a deliberate policy, with very much with the public's interest in mind.
What is your administration's policy on ownership, public access to beaches, and a Mark Golding-led administration? What would be your policy on beaches in Jamaica?
At this point in time, I think the first step we need, our policy will be to ensure that all those beaches which are accessible to the public remain accessible to the public, that any attempts to curtail that are resisted and not allowed to proceed, and that those beaches be afforded reasonable accommodation to make visits there as comfortable as possible in terms of bathroom facilities and that kind of thing.
Do you realize that this point you just made, you realize that even while you're speaking, the people are losing access to the beaches, even while we're speaking at this minute?
Yes, I am aware because, for example, I visited a place called Old Pera in St. Thomas, which is a beautiful beach, pristine in its natural condition, which the people of those communities have traditionally had access to. And what happened was the owners, and I don't want to call their names for, legal reasons, because I don't feel that I want to put you or me in problems. But the people who claim to own it had started to fence it off and prevent the communities from accessing the beach, which they had traditionally accessed. And as far as I'm concerned, they have what is called prescriptive right. Under the law, if you have, for example, been able to walk along a pathway to a beach over a person's land for long periods of time, that becomes a right which is protected by the law. And so, I visited there and highlighted that issue on behalf of the people. Mm-hmm. So I'm aware that more and more, as people, especially as the tourism industry continues to expand, it is often done at the expense of people's access to the beautiful beaches that we have.
What is your administration? What is your administration willing to commit to in terms of access to beaches this morning?
As I've said, first of all, I am prepared to commit to protecting all of those beaches that remain available to the public, so that the public continues to have access to them, and we stop taking away rights from the public. That is the first step. And thereafter, I think we need to look at how is it, for example, that we can try to achieve a more balanced way in which the beaches that exist but which are not accessible because there's no way to get to them over the land. You know, how can we try and encourage more inclusion of local people on those beaches and live in a symbiotic way with the guests who are visiting and with the owners of the hotels? But that is a difficult process that would require some constructive engagement or authentic dialogue to try and reach some kind of understanding there. But I think the first step is to protect what we still have for the public.
Well, obviously, you know, it is something that is critical, where I think, personally looking and studying over the years as a student of history, the Morant Bay War, the conditions, the socioeconomic conditions that led to that march on the courthouse in Stony, in Morant Bay from Stony Gut, I think we have passed that. I know that you itemize some things that have changed, for example, access to education, but we can debate that right now for a minute, considering what's happening in the classrooms in an age of technology. But here we are, where the socio-economic conditions on the island are very similar to what happened in 1865, and you as a minister, leader of the opposition, you have tabled a motion calling for the day when Paul Bogle was hanged and so many others were massacred to be celebrated as a day commemorating Paul Bogle, meaning that we honor Paul Bogle and what he stood for and what he fought against. Do you see that we're near revolution?
Well, I do believe that it is important as part of trying to move forward and trying to achieve a better balance within our own society and make sure that the people are the center of what we do. I think it is important to draw inspiration from our leaders of the past who died or otherwise were sacrificed in that struggle. And I think the inspiration we can draw from them should empower us and give us the courage to try and make bold steps towards achieving a better situation in our own lives here now. So that is why I think it's important that we honor our heroes appropriately, and hence the motion that I table in relation to Paul Bogle. I also think that, as I said, Sam Sharp ought to have, he's another person who I think is under-recognized for his achievement, because the Christmas War, whatever that is called, that he led, was a significant factor in the abolition of slavery, not just in Jamaica.
The Emancipation Wars.
Across the English-speaking world, which was at that time was a massive part of the globe. So, Sam Sharp, and he did so essentially by trying to use peaceful means in his case. And so I think people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King really come out of the tradition that was started by Sam Sharp.
I don't know about that. Gandhi, we do not honor Gandhi in this space. We know that he was a racist, and wherever we see racism, we call it out. As a matter of fact, there are so many statues of Gandhi in Jamaica that we need to knock down every single one of them and burn them, along with those of Columbus. And I know the opposition leader is on the line, and I'm going to ask you to lead that charge, Mr. Mark Golding, taking down the Gandhi statues.
Look into that because Gandhi is known as somebody who helped to liberate India from colonial oppression.
Well, Queen Victoria is also known as somebody who has liberated Africans from slavery, but not Nogoso.
Who's that?
Queen, whoever the Queen was. Not Nogoso. So it's no things not Nogoso. Finally, Mr. Golding, and I know you didn't come to be on so long, but your table motion on Paul Bogle, so you must answer the questions.
Sure, man.
Here is a question that says, can you table a motion in Parliament to replace the Beach Control Act of 1956?
Yes, one could do that. Or one could in terms of a procedure for that, one, you could table a motion. That would not achieve, even if it was approved, that wouldn't achieve the repeal of the Act. The Act would then, as I said, the motions have no legal force. They're just really a statement, which has been endorsed by Parliament. It then would turn on the government to actually initiate legislation to repeal the Beach Control Act. Another approach would be to actually table a bill, what we call a private member's bill, which is itself an act of Parliament, if passed, which would repeal the Beach Control Act. But the question is, one, in order to do that, one would have to think about, okay, are you replacing it with something? Are you just going to repeal it and have no regulation of beaches whatsoever? If you are going to replace it with something, what regime are you going to replace it with? So that, that would require some thought, some research, and some analytical work to back it up for it to, I think, have any chance of success.
But it can be done. It
can be done. And I would welcome, as somebody who's passionate about that issue, I'd welcome your input as to what you think should replace the Beach Control Act. And if we can come up with a coherent proposed scheme that would make sense for the rights of the people, then I'd be more than happy to endorse it.
Well, the organization that I'm a part of, JABEM, we're very happy, along with Dr. Devon Taylor, to talk to you about this so that we can get this moving.
Well, let us do it. Let us do it. And I'll also follow up on your question about the gazetting of the enactment that expunged the record of the martyrs.
All right. Thank you so much for spending some time talking to us this morning. We'll keep an eye out for what's happening, and we insist that you remove that church service from the motion. No, you're not going to, but we will stand up against it.
Who is we? When you say we?
We are all Bogle's children. All of Bogle's children.
But it's Bogle's. Is one of Bogle's descendants was the one who...
No. Look here. Blood. You see, when it comes to our revolutionary leaders, blood descendant doesn't always count. It is those of us who buy into the idea and the ideology, as you, as a member of the People's National Party, know very well.
I hear you, Kabu. Well, we can look at the question of the church service. There may be others who disagree with that, but I'm open to it. It's not something I'm trying to own for myself. It is something just to move a process forward.
Thank you very much.
Direction.
Thank you very much, Leader of the Opposition, Mark Golding. They're talking about a myriad of issues, but all of them coming right back to Baba Paul Bogle. And it's interesting because we have this motion that has been that Mark Golding, tabled in Parliament. On the face of it, it looks very good, and we're congratulating him.